Five Nights at Freddy's 3 isn't the first FNAF game that comes to mind when you think of huge mysteries in this franchise, right? If I asked you to list 3 of the biggest mysteries in the franchise and its community, your answers might be FNAF 4, Midnight Motorist, and why there's at least 100 people out there whose job it is to talk about these kinds of things. Odds are, FNAF 3 didn't even cross your mind while making that list, right? Well, today it's time to rethink everything you thought you knew about FNAF 3, because in this theory, we'll be debunking the most important part of this game in the eyes of the community, the year it takes place. And trust me, 2023 is probably not the year FNAF 3 happens in. I'm Wizard Circle, and for the second week in a row, I'll be challenging your ideas of the FNAF timeline. This video and today's subject became a necessity for me to make and talk about because of this FNAF 3 video recently published by Gibby's Horror Homestead, where he makes the bold claim that FNAF 3, without a shadow of a doubt, happens in 2015 and not 2023 as you might have thought. This video will be a bit short, sorry about that, but it just had to be this way. I'm going to be talking a bit about Gibby's video today, but I want to make it exceptionally clear that even though I'll end up disagreeing with some aspects of that video, I mean no disrespect to anyone. I hold all FNAF theory creators I've interacted with, and most of whom I haven't, in the highest regard, and even though Gibby's only ever indirectly addressed me once, that doesn't matter. He is still one of my favorite creators in the space, and I want you to know that going into this video. However, there will be points where I might not hold back on my constructive criticism for that video. My intention isn't to make a commentary on that theory, but to talk about my own opinion and some of my ideas and how those may differ from Gibby's. After all, we should strive for positive discussion in the community, whether it be between theorists or just fans in general. If you're wondering why I've made 2 timeline-shattering videos back to back, I'm doing my best to make a sub 2-hour FNAF timeline with my idea of the lore. This one will be a lot different from anything you've seen before, and I'm really excited to put it out. It was initially set to come out this December, but I decided to push it back to early next year so I have more time to finalize my thoughts on some topics, and mainly because of the Return to the Pit novel that's coming out this Christmas. But with that out of the way, let's get into the nitty-gritty of today's subject. The first question that starts it all is, what evidence do we have for FNAF 3's timeline placement, and what led fans to believe that this third installment took place in 2023? Scott Cawthon started teasing FNAF 3 for the official Scott Games website in late 2014, with several teasers starring Springtrap all hyping up the next big game. One of these teasers showed a head of the new animatronic in dim lighting, and in the source code of the website was a message: Five Nights at Freddy's, 30 years later, only one. The teasers continued for several months until finally the game was released on March 2nd of 2015. Along with it came FNAF 3's Steam page that says the following. 30 years after Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closed its doors, the events that took place there have become nothing more than a rumor and a childhood memory. But the owners of Fazbear's Fright, the horror attraction, are determined to revive the legend and make the experience as authentic as possible for patrons, going to great lengths to find anything that might have survived decades of neglect and ruin. At first, there were only empty shells, a hand, a hook, an old paper plate doll, but then, a remarkable discovery was made. The attraction now has one animatronic. This, combined with the Five Nights at Freddy's 30 years later only one from the Scott Games source code we just talked about, makes it pretty clear that FNAF 3 happens 30 years after one of the many Freddy Fazbear's locations closed down. But which one? Throughout the history of the game's franchise, we find out about 3 distinct Freddy Fazbear's locations this Steam description could be referring to. The original location opened in 1983 and closed in 1985 after the Missing Children incident, the grand reopening location from FNAF 2 with the toys, and finally the iconic FNAF 1 building. So, which one of these could it be referring to? The FNAF 2 location is definitely not it. That place wasn't open for too long, and although there were rumors circulating around it during the 80s, I don't see any childhood memories being made there. The FNAF 1 and original locations are the 2 strongest contenders in my opinion. So, which one? Let's break down some of the evidence for both. Gibby's Horror Homestead goes really deep into the evidence for the original MCI location being the one the description is talking about. Essentially, it boils down to the fact that not only were there obviously rumors and childhood memories made around the place, but it was also closed down after the MCI, and we don't technically know if the FNAF 1 location closed after that game took place, or if it was later, or even before. The year the MCI took place in, 1985, was also probably already planned by Scott by the time of FNAF 3, since FNAF 3 came out just a few months before the Silver Eyes novel, where the year of the incident was revealed. Also, FNAF 3 literally came out in 2015. Wouldn't it be perfect for Scott to set the game in the year it was released? After all, why else would the gap be exactly 30 years? Why not 50 or 20 or 15? What if the reason it's specifically 30 is because Scott Cawthon wanted to line it up with the MCI? But that's not all. There's more proof of the year being 2015 in the survival logbook. In the logbook, we can see different people write inside it, with Michael Afton writing with a red pen and the 2 spirits in faded and altered text. And judging by the illustrations in it, we can conclude Mike is writing in it around the time of FNAF 3. On one of the pages, there's a bunch of Freddy Fazbear Pizza coupons worth $12. Scribbled under the $12 text is a message in red pen. For real value, turn to page 61. When we turn to the page, we can see a whiteboard of the numbers 5 plus 4 and the 3 in the corner. This is likely meant to be 3 times 5 plus 4 in between brackets, which equals 27. Essentially, using a bit of math and seeing which time periods best transfer $12 to $27 due to inflation, we get 12 for 1992, the year FNAF 1 takes place, and 27 for 2017, the year the survival logbook came out. Meaning that if this is accurate, FNAF 3 has to happen before 2017. There's more evidence and nuance to it, but for that I suggest you watch Gibby's video on the subject. Now we move on to the interesting stuff. What evidence is there for FNAF 3 taking place in a year other than 2015, and how do both options influence the timeline? Well, one of the key pieces of evidence for the theory that FNAF 3 takes place 30 years after FNAF 1 is the Five Nights at Freddy's 30 years later teaser from the Scott Games website. After all, why wouldn't it be 30 years after FNAF 1 if one of the first teasers outright says it? Additionally, people used HRY223 from the FNAF 6 Insanity ending and how it might mean that FNAF 6 is in 2023 to prove FNAF 3 is 2. But as Gibby pointed out in this video, this is circular logic. You're using an assumption to prove another assumption that relies solely on the first assumption. I don't think the HRY223 recording is set in 2023, since it's a weird way of writing a date, and Henry made many logs during FNAF 6, so we couldn't have just the one log of that name if FNAF 6 was in 2023. But let's assume FNAF 3 is in 2015 anyway. How does this influence the timeline? Well, the early parts of the story stay more or less the same. In my opinion, FNAF 1 takes place in 1992, and FNAF 2 obviously happens in 1987. Anything in the timeline before FNAF 3 remains unchanged. It's only what happens after that changes. Since Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Sim likely happened shortly after 3, that means it must happen around 2017, which sadly disproves my FFPS 2027 theory from last week if FNAF 3 being in 2015 is true. This also means that the Pizzaplex era, namely Help Wanted, FNAF AR, Security Breach, Ruin, Help Wanted 2, and so on, happened earlier than we thought. If the time gap between FNAF 1 and 3 is smaller, that means FNAF AR and Help Wanted can happen as early as 2020, although I'd prefer to set them in the mid-2020s and Security Breach closer to 2030. Now, what do I like about FNAF 3 being in 2015? Well, first off, it lessens the huge time gap between Sister Location and FNAF 3 and 6. After all, what did Mike and all the animatronics do during that 20-year gap? The smaller that hole in the timeline is, the better. It also helps with some other theories like Vanessa Afton by setting the Pizzaplex era sooner. If you want a detailed look into that theory, I suggest you watch my video on how Vanessa could be William Afton's child after this one. But anyway, as much as FNAF 3 being in 2015 makes sense, there were some things about Gibby's video that I disagreed with. First off, and this is the most important thing, the title and thumbnail. No, FNAF 3 being in 2015 isn't a fact. It's still very much a theory even though it has itself some solid evidence and backup. I will still take it as a theory until it's confirmed by Scott or some piece of media. While FNAF 3 being in 2015 makes sense, I'm still not fully sold. I guess I'll have to wait until the next FNAF interactive novel to see if that affects the timeline in favor of this theory or not. Also, I think the survival logbook evidence with the monetary conversion due to inflation is a bit of a stretch. I want to make it clear that I make stretches in my theories all the time, and this one isn't egregious, but I don't usually like using real life stuff to justify the FNAF lore or universe, maybe calendar dates at most. Gibby also says that Scott picking a date in the future for FNAF 3 is weird and doesn't make much sense, but to be honest, that's not a very strong point. I'm not gonna act petty and say, oh, but Security Breach, I understand what Gibby meant, but in my opinion 2023 or 2022 or whatever is still possible. It's just a bit more unlikely now. I feel like the biggest thing holding back this theory is that teaser from Scott Games. After all, it says Five Nights at Freddy's 30 years later, not Freddy Fazbear's 30 years later. It's obviously not out of the question that Scott could change his mind since that teaser, but I'm not sure. Thanks for watching. Sorry again that this one's on the short side, I just had to get my thoughts out there in a quick little theory, and I promise we'll get back to full-length content soon. Remember to please subscribe if you enjoyed, and remember to check out the original video on Gibby's channel and go show it your support. As always, theorists, remember, keep on theorizing and never stop overthinking. This has been Withered Circle, the Midnight Theorist.